I thought God was silent. For years. I truly believed that. Not in an angry way. Not with my fist raised toward heaven. Just quietly convinced that somewhere along the line, I'd been left behind. That maybe I'd done something wrong, or prayed the wrong way. Maybe I just wasn't the kind of person God spoke to anymore. I remember sitting in my car one afternoon. Must have been 20 years ago now. Parked in the driveway after work. Engine off. Just sitting there. And I remember whispering out loud, "Are you even listening?" No answer. Just the ticking of the cooling engine. The hum of the neighbor's lawnmower down the street. Silence. When I was younger, I had this idea about how God worked. I thought faith meant certainty. I thought if I prayed hard enough, believed strong enough, that God would respond like a conversation, clear, immediate, unmistakable. I wanted signs. I wanted that burning bush moment, or at least a clear sense of direction, a voice, a feeling, something I could point to and say, there, that's God. That's my answer. I read stories in scripture about people who heard from God. Moses at the mountain, Samuel in the temple, Paul on the road to Damascus. And I thought, that's what it's supposed to be like. So I waited, and nothing. The thing is, life doesn't stop just because you're waiting. Bills still come. Work still demands your time. Relationships still need tending. And somewhere in all that, somewhere in the middle of just getting through, I started to feel like I was alone. I still went to church most Sundays, still said grace before meals, still prayed, though the prayers started to feel like talking to myself, like throwing words into a dark room and hearing nothing bounce back. I prayed about my job, about whether I should stay or leave. No answer. I prayed about my kids, about how to reach them when they pulled away. No answer. I prayed about my marriage during a season when my wife and I could barely look at each other without tension. No answer. Just silence. There were years in there where I wondered if I'd misunderstood everything. If maybe God only spoke to certain people, and I just wasn't one of them. I'd sit in church and hear someone give a testimony about how God had directed them, how they'd felt peace about a decision, how doors had opened at just the right time. And I'd think, where's mine? I didn't feel peace. I felt tired. Tired of waiting, tired of uncertainty, tired of watching other people seem to have it all figured out while I was still stumbling in the dark. And I'll be honest with you. There were moments I felt forgotten, not rejected exactly, just overlooked. I never stopped praying, though, even when it felt useless, even when it felt like going through motions. Something in me kept reaching out, kept whispering into that silence. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the last thread of hope. But I kept praying. It wasn't until much later, years later, that I started to see it differently. I was sitting on the back porch one evening, sun going down, just watching the sky change colors. And I was thinking back over everything. All those years of waiting, all those unanswered prayers. And something shifted. Not in a sudden, dramatic way. More like when you've been staring at something so long that your eyes finally adjust and you see what was there all along. I started to notice things I hadn't noticed. The job I'd wanted to leave. The one I'd prayed about for years. I realized that job had taught me patience, steadiness. It had taught me how to show up even when I didn't feel like it. How to work with people I didn't like. How to find dignity in ordinary labor. I hadn't seen it as a gift. But looking back, maybe it was. And my kids. There were years I'd prayed for God to help me reach them, to help me be the father they needed. And I'd felt like every prayer bounced off the ceiling and fell flat. But looking back, I could see small things. The way my son came to me years later and told me he'd always appreciated that I never gave up on him, that I kept showing up, even when he pushed me away. The way my daughter told me just recently that she remembered me praying at the dinner table. And even though she'd rolled her eyes as a teenager, it had mattered to her. She'd carried that with her. I didn't see it when it was happening, but it was there. God was working, just quietly. And my marriage. There was a season where I didn't think we'd make it, where the distance between us felt too wide to cross. I'd prayed so many times for God to fix it, to change her heart, to change my heart, and I'd felt nothing. But now, sitting here decades later, I can see that we both changed. Slowly, painfully. Not in some miraculous overnight transformation, but in 1,000 tiny ways. 1,000 small surrenders. And I think maybe that was the answer all along. Maybe God was working in the waiting, in the silence, in the slow, unglamorous work of two people learning to love each other. I think about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying, pleading, asking God to take away what was coming. And the answer was silence. But that silence didn't mean God had abandoned him. Didn't mean God wasn't working in ways that would become clear later. The silence was part of the story. And maybe our silence is too. I'm an old man now. I've lived long enough to see how some of this turns out. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to know that the years I thought were wasted weren't. Enough to know that the prayers I thought went unanswered were answered. Just not in the way I expected. Enough to know that God was working all along, even when I couldn't see it, especially when I couldn't see it. So I've learned to be okay with the silence now. I've learned to stop demanding answers. Stop straining to hear something. Stop comparing my journey to everyone else's. I've learned to trust that God is there, that He's working, that His timing is better than mine, even when it doesn't feel like it. And I've learned to rest in the waiting, not because I'm more spiritual now, not because I've figured it all out, but because I've seen enough to know that the waiting isn't wasted, that the silence is part of the conversation, that God speaks in more ways than I ever realized.